Ferrari takes the first pole position of the 2025 Formula One season. A superb performance from Lewis Hamilton, slightly less so from his Maranello teammate Charles Leclerc. Leclerc will still start from the second row, but remains in contention for the top positions in tomorrow's sprint race at the 5.451-kilometer Shanghai International Circuit. The telemetry analysis between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen highlights the differences in their driving approaches. The seven-time Formula One world champion manages to extract the maximum from his SF-25 car, thanks also to the setup adjustments introduced in Shanghai after the Melbourne disaster. The Maranello team worked to lower the car and find a more predictable balance, a key element in improving stability and handling in low and medium-speed corners. From the approach to Turn 1, Lewis Hamilton stands out with a refined setup throughout the practice sessions. Unlike Max Verstappen, he does not completely lift off the throttle when applying the initial brake input for trail braking, but does so gradually. This technique is essential to limit the forward weight transfer, and, as a result, prevent excessive rotation, which is one of the issues Ferrari particularly struggled with in the only free practice session in China. By keeping a slight throttle open, the British driver manages to maintain greater rear stability, reducing wheel slip and improving turn-in. During the lap, car number 44 proves highly competitive not only in the slower sections, where it achieves higher minimum speeds than the Red Bull RB21, but also in the fast zone between turn 7 and 8. Here, Lewis Hamilton perfectly exploits the trailing throttle technique, keeping the accelerator partially open, around 30%, to better control, oversteer, and maintain a higher average speed than Max Verstappen. However, between turns 10 and 13, Ferrari's limitations become apparent, with a slight but predictable understeer. This forces Lewis Hamilton to delay acceleration out of turn 10 and apply a slight brake tap at turn 12, resulting in a significant speed deficit compared to the Dutchman. Fortunately, the power of the 0.6615 power unit allows him to quickly compensate for the time lost in cornering on the straights. The final sector of the Shanghai circuit highlights another key aspect. Max Verstappen manages to close the gap to Lewis Hamilton by systematically anticipating braking and acceleration phases. Telemetry data analysis clearly shows an earlier corner entry and a quicker return to the throttle, translating into an overall gain of approximately 0.100 seconds, which is a difference that proves crucial in the fight for the Chinese sprint pole position. Now let's also look at the differences between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc based on data collected from the best laps in SQ3. The telemetry comparison between Ferrari's two teammates highlights a couple of interesting factors. On one hand, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc's driving styles are extremely similar, with minimal differences in lap management. On the other, the Briton appears to have found a more effective setup, better balancing both the vehicle's mechanics and its aerodynamic platform. Turn 1 is a crucial point where the first discrepancies emerge. The Monegasque driver, despite adopting a similar throttle approach, releases the brake pedal intermittently. This choice necessitates a stiffer setup to counteract pitching but penalizes him in slower sections. Unsurprisingly, in corners with a minimum speed below 150 km per hour, Charles Leclerc is consistently slower. Overall, he loses 0.150 seconds just in Turn 1, highlighting how crucial good rear stability is for building lap time. The dampers play a key role in this scenario. Their function is to control weight transfer between the front and rear, and this is where Lewis Hamilton seems to have found the right combination. The rear dampers on his Ferrari are set with slower rebound, allowing him to keep weight on the rear for as long as possible and in turn improve traction on corner exit. In reality, this could also be considered a more aggressive front-end setup, increasing slow compression to further stabilize the car on entry. Another crucial factor is the differential lock, which helps manage torque on deceleration and improves the car's rotation. Generally, when this component is more open on corner entry, it aids rotation and reduces understeer, while a partial closure at the apex helps limit oversteer. On corner exits, a more open differential again allows for a tighter racing line without excessive steering input. Here too, Lewis Hamilton has optimized these parameters compared to Charles Leclerc, who appears slightly more challenged in managing the car's dynamic balance. As the lap progresses, the Monegasque driver manages to take advantage of a stiffer setup in high-speed corners. Specifically, this applies to Turn 12, taken at around 180 km per hour, and Turn 16, where Charles Leclerc is always quicker on the throttle, maintaining a higher cornering speed than the Briton. This suggests that despite his struggles in slow sections, his Ferrari performs more effectively in faster corners, where the stiffness of the setup becomes a benefit rather than a drawback. Ferrari's goal for Shanghai was quite clear: to make a decisive step forward. Falling behind in Formula One almost certainly means condemning oneself to oblivion, as rivals never stop. They chase a horizon that always seems to move just a bit further away. And this was precisely the first major obstacle the Italian side had to face at the start of the 2025 Formula One season. After the disappointing weekend at the Albert Park circuit, the key figures were brutally honest. Project 677, known as the SF-25, is not the machine everyone had envisioned. The delay weighs heavily, like a long shadow at sunset. That was not good news. However, something has changed, because the engineers in Maranello, through their work in recent days, have succeeded in their mission. In short, an excellent Ferrari. For the Chinese Grand Prix, the sprint race made its debut. A weekend as tense as a violin string, where time is a luxury no one can afford and every hesitation comes at a high price. In FP1, the only 60 minutes available to refine the setup outlined in the simulator's cold calculations, Ferrari showed signs of recovery. The ride height issues from Melbourne seemed to have been resolved, thanks in particular to temporary suspension adjustments while awaiting upgrades. Overall, the car's balance proved to be more harmonious compared to its last, troubled outing in the World Championship. But not everything was perfect. There was still a need to take a step forward, to prove that qualifying would not be another dark night, that the prancing horse would not just chase but dare to go wheel to wheel with its rivals and compete directly. At the end of the first sprint qualifying of the 2025 season, what can we say? Ferrari rightfully takes pole, edging out Max Verstappen by a whisker. The Dutchman leads the first of the two McLarens, driven by Oscar Piastri, who in turn is ahead of Charles Leclerc. At this stage, it is worth pointing out that Lewis Hamilton faced heavy criticism last week. The Briton found himself at the center of controversy because, according to the usual comments from various pundits and so-called Formula One experts and analysts who somehow get to write in print and online, he was already in crisis with Ferrari. An early retirement, an old washed-up driver who lashes out at his race engineer because he is no longer fast. Charles Leclerc would destroy him all season, and so on. Granted, a pole position does not define an entire season, and it may well be that the Monegasque is ultimately faster than Lewis Hamilton. But today, at least in the sprint qualifying, the Englishman proved he is still a great driver, a raw talent capable of seizing the moment and delivering the result. A small revenge, if we can call it that, against the gossipers. From FP1 onward, listening to the radio exchanges between Lewis and Adami, we noticed a certain improvement in their rapport. Hamilton used several differential settings rarely heard over Ferrari's team radio, a well-prepared effort to provide the seven-time world champion with all the support possible. The former Mercedes driver delivered brilliantly, managing the car down to the smallest detail.